In just a few moments' time, when we dive underwater, this submarine will become essentially invisible, undetectable to anyone.
The Virginia class is acoustically the stealthiest submarine that the U.S. Navy has ever produced.
Beneath the crushing depths of the Atlantic, where light dies and the ocean swallows sound, something enormous moves in silence. Forged from millions of pounds of steel and human genius, it was built not to be seen, not to be heard, but to command the deep.
She is a monster, nearly 8 million kilograms of steel, 115 meters long, capable of carrying a dozen missiles and close to 30 torpedoes.
She is the USS Virginia, the invisible hunter that changed the way humanity fights beneath the sea.
The 15th Virginia-class submarine, the USS Colorado. She's 377 feet long. She can dive to depths greater than 800 feet. She can operate at speeds greater than 25 knots.
The birth of the Virginia-class submarines. When the Cold War ended, the U.S. Navy had to ask itself a tough question. What should the next attack submarine really be? The massive Seawolf class had just rolled out, a beast of engineering built to stalk Soviet fleets, but the price tag was brutal, roughly $3 billion per boat. It was the kind of number only an arms race could justify. With the Soviet Union gone, that logic no longer worked. The Navy needed something leaner, cheaper, and still deadly. Something that could dominate deep water but also sneak into the shallow, crowded coastal zones where future fights were likely to happen. Out of that rethink came the Virginia program, a new breed of attack sub that could do almost everything Seawolf could, but at a fraction of the cost. The Navy made one huge decision early on. They would split the work between two legendary builders. Electric Boat up in Groton, Connecticut, and Newport News Shipbuilding down in Virginia would share every single hull. Instead of one yard building an entire submarine, each would craft massive sections, complete pre-outfitted pieces of the ship, then ship them to the other yard by barge for final assembly. Sharing the load kept both workforces sharp, lowered the risk if one yard ran into trouble, and ensured the Navy could keep a predictable production line going year after year. You can see the system in action if you visit Electric Boat. Groton is still the heart of the program, but a lot of the heavy steel work begins farther north, at Quonset Point in Rhode Island. That's where workers cut thick steel plates, roll them into huge cylindrical sections of the pressure hull, and stand them upright under cranes taller than a building. While those rings are still open, they install piping, pumps, tanks, and miles of cable. Everything they can possibly fit before the sections ever come together. Instead of crawling through a cramped tube to bolt things sideways, crews work on open floors with plenty of light and space. Later, they rotate and join the finished rings like puzzle pieces, welding them into a full-length hull. That's modular construction. And it's one of the biggest reasons the Virginia program stayed affordable and on schedule. The Virginia class became the first U.S. submarine ever designed entirely in 3 dimensions. No paper blueprints stacked on desks. The designers built a single living digital model of the entire submarine, right down to the tiniest pipe run, cable tray, or valve handle. If 2 systems tried to occupy the same space, you'd see it immediately on screen, long before it turned into a welding problem in the yard. And once you have a complete 3D digital twin of your submarine, upgrades become a lot easier. Say the Navy wants to swap in new electronics or move a bulkhead to make room for better equipment. You don't start tearing into metal. You model it first, check every cable length, every airflow path, and every shock mount, and then feed the change into the production plan with confidence. The designers also made one bold call that completely changed how the inside of the submarine would feel. They ditched the traditional optical periscope. Instead, they went with photonics masts, slim camera towers that rise through the sail but don't pierce the pressure hull. The images come down digitally on fiber optic lines. not through mirrors and glass. Inside the control room, that's a revolution. You go from a tiny soda straw view through a spinning tube to a high-definition panoramic image projected on wide screens. But for the builders, that change did something even bigger. It freed the control room from its old spot directly under the periscope. You no longer had to build the command center around a single column of optics. You could move it lower in the hull, make it wider, safer, and far easier to navigate. Even the hand controls changed. The original mast was steered with a heavy helicopter-style control stick that sailors found awkward. Then someone tested a standard game controller, simple, cheap, and already familiar to most of the crew, and it worked better. So the Navy kept it. The Navy signed the contract on September 30th, 1998. The keel was laid in Groton the following September. She touched water on August 16, 2003, and joined the fleet a little over a year later, on October 23, 2004. Linda Bird Johnson Robb, daughter of President Lyndon B. Johnson, served as the ship's sponsor and gave the traditional order to bring her to life. Now that we've seen why the Virginia class exists and how it was built, it's time to step inside that hull and find out what actually makes her disappear beneath the sea. Inside USS Virginia, America's silent hunter of the deep. The beating heart of this boat is a nuclear reactor built to last the life of the ship. Sailors call it an S9G core. That reactor makes steam, and that steam turns turbines that drive propulsion. But the Virginia class doesn't use a bare propeller. Instead, it pushes water with a pump jet, a ringed fan hidden inside a duct. Think of it like a jet engine for water. The flow is smoother, the blades shed fewer bubbles, and the whole setup vibrates less. In submarine work, less vibration means less noise, and less noise is how you stay alive. Officially, the Navy says these boats can dive deeper than 800 feet and can run faster than 25 knots, which is about 29 miles per hour. The exact top numbers are classified. In a submarine, sound is everything. So everything forward of the stern is about listening and making sense of what you hear. The first Virginias carried a big spherical sonar array right in the bow. Later boats swapped that sphere for a large aperture bow array, a horseshoe-shaped, water-backed sensor that's easier to maintain and gives a cleaner acoustic picture in the frequencies that matter. Along the sides of the hull run wide-aperture flank arrays, like two long ears, giving the crew a tall, wide image of the ocean's noise. Under the bow sits a high-frequency chin array for close-in safety and mine detection. There are more high-frequency panels up in the sail for tight maneuvering under ice or in cluttered waters. Together, those sensors let the crew pick tiny acoustic patterns out of a noisy ocean and do it without advertising their own position. All of that raw sound feeds into an open architecture brain. The Virginia's combat system, called ANBYG-1, was designed so the Navy can keep dropping new processors and fresh code into the ship without tearing the whole thing apart. This lets the ship learn new tricks, fold in machine learning tools, and keep up with threats without going back to the yard for months of rewiring. When it is time to bite, Virginia uses a heavyweight the crew trusts, the Mark 48 Advanced Capability Torpedo. The Mod 7 upgrade, called CBAS for Common Broadband Advanced Sonar System, gave the weapon a wideband digital sonar so it performs much better in shallow water and can handle modern decoys. The torpedo launches on a wire so the fire control team can guide it during the tricky beginning of the run, then the weapon can take over and finish the chase. Like the ship itself, the torpedo gets better through software updates, so the hardware stays the same while its brain improves. Torpedoes are only part of the offensive picture. From the start, Virginia's carried land attack cruise missiles. Early boats had a dozen small vertical launch tubes in the bow for Tomahawks. Later, production blocks moved to two large payload tubes up front, each sized to hold 6 Tomahawks. The missile itself has a published range on the order of 1,000 miles, and newer Block 5 variants add smarter navigation and a maritime strike seeker for moving targets. That capability lets a single attack submarine reach inland targets from far offshore with deadly precision. The largest step in strike power, though, was the Virginia payload module. On Block 5 boats, the Navy inserts a mid-body section roughly 84 feet long. Inside that plug are 4 very large tubes, and each tube can hold 7 Tomahawks. That adds 28 missiles on top of whatever the bow tubes carry. The extra length pushes the boat to about 461 feet overall. Submerged, a Block 5 Virginia weighs about 23 million pounds. Weapons and sensors matter, but what really sets the class apart is how all those systems are packaged for missions that must stay invisible. The torpedo room, for example, is flexible. It can convert into berths so a platoon of special operators can live aboard with their gear. The sub includes a lockout trunk that allows divers to slip out and return underwater without the boat surfacing. The same tubes that can fire torpedoes are also compatible with launching small unmanned undersea vehicles, robots that scout ahead, plant sensors, or take risky jobs so sailors don't have to. The Navy has been pushing those tube-launched drones hard. Recent tests show they can run longer and do more complex tasks. To keep everything running smoothly, the Virginia depends on strict routines and smart design choices that make it almost impossible to detect. Each submarine sails with about 140 crew members, roughly 18 officers and the rest are enlisted sailors, all packed inside a steel tube that holds a nuclear reactor, a machine shop, and every system needed to live underwater for months. A normal deployment lasts around 6 months, with long training periods before and heavy maintenance after. Inside the sub, silence is everything. Every pump sits on vibration mounts to stop noise from spreading through the hull. Bolts, panels, and cables are arranged so they don't rattle or hum. Even daily routines are built around one goal: staying quiet. Most of the time, watch teams in the sonar room sit in near darkness, listening. They scan through hours of ocean noise, searching for the faint sound of another vessel. At the same time, the control team guides the submarine through the deep, adjusting course and depth to stay hidden. Down there, success means no one ever knew you were there at all. Before the Virginia ever took sea trials, another class taught the Navy the lessons of silent hunting: what to keep and what to change. USS Los Angeles, the submarine that ruled the Cold War. The Los Angeles class was born in the early 1970s. The Cold War was still heating the oceans, and the U.S. Navy wanted a new kind of hunter, one that could move fast, stay quiet, and disappear for months without being found. The result was the Los Angeles class attack submarine. The first of its kind, USS Los Angeles joined the fleet in November 1976. Over the next 20 years, the Navy built 62 of them, more than any other nuclear-powered attack class in U.S. history. Keels were laid from 1972 all the way through the mid-1990s, and deliveries kept coming until 1996. That's nearly a quarter century of non-stop submarine building. Even the names marked a turning point. For most of the 20th century, American attack submarines were named after sea creatures: sharks, barracudas, swordfish. But the Los Angeles boats changed that. They were named after cities: Los Angeles, Boston, Dallas, and Miami. Each name tied the submarine to a community, a place that funded it and sent sailors to crew it. Admiral Hyman Rickover, often called the father of the nuclear navy, pushed that change with one blunt line that stuck for decades: fish don't vote. On paper, the Los Angeles class didn't look flashy. Each one measured roughly 360 feet long with a beam of 33 feet and displaced close to 7,000 tons underwater. Publicly, the Navy only admitted two figures: that it could dive deeper than 650 feet and move faster than 25 knots, about 29 miles per hour, while submerged. But the real numbers have always been classified. At the core of every Los Angeles submarine sat a nuclear pressurized water reactor, turning steam into power and giving the ship an almost unlimited range. The crew could stay at sea for months. The only real limit was food. The class arrived in waves, which the Navy calls flights. Each flight added new capabilities while keeping the same core mission: find, track, and if needed, destroy. Flight 1, the original design through the early 1980s, set the foundation. Each submarine carried 4 torpedo tubes up front, 21 inches wide, built to launch heavyweight torpedoes or other munitions. Their main weapon was the Mark 48 torpedo. Over the years, that same weapon received new sensors and software that made it sharper without ever changing its body. It's one of the reasons the Los Angeles class could stay lethal without expensive redesigns. Flight 2 changed everything visually, and after the first 31 boats, the Navy added 12 vertical launch tubes into the bow. Suddenly, a submarine didn't have to use its torpedo tubes for cruise missiles. It could fire Tomahawks straight up and out. That small change gave the fleet a huge new reach. When the Gulf War began in 1991, Los Angeles-class submarines were among the first platforms to launch Tomahawk missiles. They fired from hundreds of miles away, striking precise targets on land without ever being seen. Then came the final generation, the improved Los Angeles boats, known to sailors as the 688I, after the Navy's hull numbering system. The last 23 boats in the series were heavily upgraded. Engineers shifted the diving planes from the sail to the bow and made them retractable, so the submarines could operate under Arctic ice. The sail itself was reinforced for ice breaking. Inside, machinery was isolated better to cut noise, and the combat system was modernized. None of those changes were dramatic on the outside, but together they made the class far tougher and quieter, ideal for missions in the world's most hostile waters. Weapons stayed simple and reliable. The Mark 48 torpedo, upgraded to the ADCAP version, remained the backbone of every patrol. The latest Mod 7 Sea Bass upgrade added digital sonar processing and new software that worked in both deep oceans and shallow coastal zones. And because those upgrades were software-based, they could be added across the fleet quickly. For land attack missions, Tomahawk missiles became the star. Submarines could carry a mix of cruise missiles and torpedoes depending on the mission, firing Tomahawks from the vertical launchers or from the torpedo tubes themselves. They could even lay mines when ordered to close off a choke point. Life on board was intense and tightly packed. A typical crew had about 16 officers and roughly 127 enlisted sailors, around 140 people in total. That's an entire neighborhood living inside a machine the length of a city block. These were boats built before digital command rooms and panoramic camera masts. Sailors looked through a real periscope, read dials and gauges, plotted contacts on paper charts, and whispered over the constant hum of machinery. The control room was hot, loud, and claustrophobic. Sailors learned to filter faint sounds from the constant noise of the sea, to trust their training, and to operate by muscle memory. The work was hard, the quarters were cramped, but the crews were some of the most disciplined in the Navy. It was that discipline that allowed these submarines to vanish for half a year and return exactly when and where they were supposed to. The Los Angeles class also had a rare public moment that showed how central it had become. On May 27, 1977, President Jimmy Carter, himself a former nuclear submariner, went to sea aboard USS Los Angeles alongside Admiral Rickover. Los Angeles-class submarines deployed from Norfolk, San Diego, Pearl Harbor, and Guam. They shadowed foreign subs, gathered intelligence, escorted carrier groups, and carried out surveillance missions that will probably stay classified for years. Even today, decades later, the pattern they established still shapes how the U.S. Navy operates. By the mid-2000s, the earliest Los Angeles boats were reaching the end of their service lives, and retirements picked up speed. But the class didn't fade away. As of 2025, about 23 Los Angeles-class submarines are still active, forming a major part of America's attack subfleet alongside newer Virginias. Now, meet the submarine designed for the toughest missions of the 2040s. SSNX, the next U.S. attack submarine. The next American attack submarine has one big goal: to do everything the Navy's ever wanted in one boat. It needs to move like a sprinter hit hard like a heavyweight, stay silent, and spend more time at sea than any submarine before it. That dream has a name: SSNX. Think of it as the Navy's ultimate hunter. They want the raw speed and firepower of the old Seawolf class, the quiet and high-tech sensors of the Virginia class, and the long-lasting reliability of the Columbia subs, all packed into one design. It's a tall order, but that's exactly what SSNX is meant to do. Right now, it's still in the design stage, not yet a real boat sitting in a shipyard. The Navy planned to start building it in the mid-2030s, but that got pushed back to around 2040. The delay isn't because the program's in trouble, it's just about money and shipyard space. The Navy is already busy building Columbias and Virginias, so they need time to keep the balance. In the meantime, design work is fully funded and moving ahead. What we do know is that SSNX will be bigger than the Virginia class, and maybe even larger than the Seawolf. It's expected to weigh around 10,000 tons underwater. That's huge, even for a submarine. The Navy estimates about $7 billion per sub, while the Congressional Budget Office says it could end up closer to $9 billion. Either way, we're talking about one of the most expensive submarines ever built. So, what makes this boat different? The Navy wants SSNX to do 4 things that no attack sub has ever done together. First, it has to move fast and stay quiet while doing it. Normally, speed and silence don't mix. The faster you go, the louder you get. But the goal here is to make it fast enough to chase or escape anything, while still hiding its noise in the natural sounds of the sea. Second, it needs to carry a lot more firepower. That means a bigger torpedo room, more launch tubes, and larger spaces for missiles. Not just today's weapons, but the ones coming in the future. Third, it has to work with uncrewed underwater vehicles, basically robot submarines. These small drones will scout ahead, check out dangerous areas, and even drop decoys or sensors while the main sub stays hidden in the distance. And fourth, it needs to spend way more time ready for action. That means less time sitting in a shipyard for repairs and more time out on missions. To make that happen, the Navy is focusing on simpler maintenance, better materials, and a layout that makes fixing things faster and easier. SSNX isn't just built to hide, it's built to control the underwater fight. It will use sound, deception, and timing to mess with enemy sensors and make the ocean itself part of its defense. There's a reason they're planning for large-diameter launchers. Other U.S. ships, like the Zumwalt destroyers and future Virginias, are being updated to fire hypersonic weapons, missiles that fly several times faster than sound. SSNX is being designed from the start to use those same launchers. So when those next-gen weapons are ready, this submarine won't need a major rebuild. It'll already be compatible. Another huge leap is how it'll handle information. The Navy wants this sub to get real-time data from other ships, aircraft, satellites, and even drones, all while staying deep underwater and moving fast. That means better antennas, faster computers, and an open software setup that can be updated over time, just like a phone or a gaming console. In short, they're designing SSNX like a system that can grow and adapt, not something that goes obsolete after a few years. You'll be able to update its software, swap out electronics, and plug in new gear without tearing the boat apart. Congress is watching all this closely, but funding keeps coming in. Every year, hundreds of millions of dollars are being poured into design work, so the engineers and welders don't lose their edge. There's also been a small debate about the nuclear fuel. Some people have suggested using a different kind of uranium, low enriched, which would make it easier to share nuclear technology with allies. But the Navy shot that idea down. They said switching fuel would make the reactor bigger, cut performance, cost billions, and take decades to pull off. So SSNX will stick with the same high-energy fuel the fleet already uses, the kind that lasts the entire life of the boat without refueling. The real challenge is making sure it doesn't become too ambitious. The Navy learned from past programs that trying to do everything at once can blow up costs. So this time, they're keeping the focus tight. There's a reason for that focus. The oceans are changing fast. rival countries are filling them with sensors, sonar networks, and drones that can spot even the faintest noise. Aircraft now carry better detectors that can find a periscope wake in seconds. Hiding forever isn't enough anymore. The Navy needs subs that can outsmart the sensors, not just dive deeper. That's where SSNX comes in, and it's not replacing the Virginia class anytime soon. The Virginias will keep running for decades, serving as the Navy's workhorses. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.